item number 3, the planning enforcement motion. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have pleasure in proposing the motion as set out on the order paper.
And do you have a seconder? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is a motion where we are resolving to call on the executive to do something in connection with planning, which is a matter that is becoming extremely urgent. It is something that affects particularly my ward and I think other wards as well. I mean, our planning system only works if people believe that the rules apply equally to everyone. The vast majority of residents, businesses and developers in Waverley follow the process properly. They submit applications, they wait for decisions, they comply with the conditions, and they do so because they respect the system. But too often, those who follow the rules watch as a small number of people deliberately ignore them, carrying out unauthorised works under cover of darkness at weekends, bank holidays, knowing full well that enforcement officers are not available. That behaviour undermines public confidence, creates conflict between neighbours, damages our environment, and ultimately costs this council far more money when harm has already been done and legal action becomes unavoidable. This motion is not about punishing honest mistakes. It's about stopping deliberate abuses of the system quickly before lasting harm occurs, and in my view will save money on the long run. The earlier you nip it in the bud, the quicker the matter is resolved, less officer time and cheaper. Acting early is not just fair, it is economical. And once unauthorised development is completed, enforcement becomes more difficult, more adversarial, and far more expensive. By contrast, early intervention often resolves matters simply and proportionately. Other councils have already recognised this and introduced out-of-hours enforcement arrangements. The result has been improved public confidence, faster resolutions, better protection for sensitive sites, neighbours and green spaces. This motion therefore asks for something entirely reasonable and proportionate. First, a pilot out-of-offices planning enforcement scheme for evenings, weekends and bank holidays, focused only on serious or urgent breaches. Second, an on-call legal support so officers can act decisively and lawfully when temporary stop notices or injunctions may be required. And as I understand it, for a stop notice, you don't need a court order, so you can get on with it. Thirdly, a proper, fully costed implementation report before the 2026 budget, setting out delivery options, including potential shared arrangements with neighbouring authorities, funding requirements and a proposed start date of February 26. And finally, better communication so residents actually know how to report serious breaches outside officer hours. This is not about creating a heavy-handed system. It's about restoring confidence, protecting communities and supporting those who do the right thing. If we want residents to respect planning rules, then the council must demonstrate that those rules are properly enforced, consistently, fairly, and when it matters most. Madam Mayor, this is a sensible, measured and proportionate step that reflects residents' expectations and protects the integrity of the planning system. All we're asking is the executive look at this and come up with the scheme as set out in the motion. I therefore commend the motion to the council.
Thank you. Councillor Austin, would you like to speak now or reserve your right?
Thank you. I will speak now. I am very happy to strongly second this motion because what we have seen specifically in our ward, but in other rural areas particularly, is a massive escalation of these planning enforcement issues, especially, you know, over weekends, bank holidays. And those responsible are aware that taking action over a weekend means the likelihood of an immediate council response is vastly reduced. And they are taking advantage of that at the moment. And I think what we must be is robust, therefore, in our response, because planning enforcement means nothing if it has no teeth. Communities are often left to do little, and I see this, they are so frustrated, they stand by and watch as breaches of planning are undertaken at pace. We all care very much about our landscapes, our green spaces and local amenity. When residents contact the council, they're in desperation and frustration, they're then told they have to wait until Monday morning. But by then, the harm is often irreversible. I've spent a few recent Friday evenings dealing with deeply concerned residents reporting planning breaches. These residents, they were distressed. And most recently, I'm grateful that officers were able to attend on the Saturday morning, but that certainly has not happened before. So a council can issue a temporary stop notice at any time. That does not require court action. You may have recently seen on this, related to this issue, a letter signed by 30 Conservative MPs sent on the 13th of November to the Home Secretary, warning that illegal development activity and planning enforcement issues of this nature now risks becoming a national emergency. And the growing inability of councils to intervene quickly enough, that is not just a Waverley issue, it's a nationwide issue, and we need to escalate and recognise it and escalate it. That's why this council must not wait for planning reform before strengthening our own local response. Our residents expect us to be present when planning concerns arise. Don't know about you, but the vast majority of my casework relates to planning. Not days after the damage is done, but they expect our council to be able to act responsively. They want to know when something serious is happening outside office hours. Someone will answer the phone, assess the risk, and take action if necessary. And it's imperative that we must escalate our response accordingly. I understand that the executive are proposing potentially an amendment, so I hope that you will all agree. I'm hoping that they will be violently agreeing with us on this issue, actually, because we do need to take action, and any cost of action is minor in comparison to the long-term legal costs and implications for our area. This is a top priority for our residents. We really do need to act. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fairclough.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Somewhat sadly, my friends continually tell me that politics is a waste of time. They ask, why does everything take so long? Why do you debate endlessly rather than just getting the job done? And I'm afraid I consider this motion to be rather a perfect example of what they mean. The author of this motion could simply have called me as the portfolio holder to look into this matter as a matter of urgency, and I would have been happy to do exactly that weeks ago. Anyway, while we were waiting for tonight, I did get on and started getting the job done. I've briefed officers to begin work to provide answers to, amongst others, 4 key questions. Question 1, what is the precise need for this service within Waverley? How many incidents of this nature have occurred within Waverley in the past 5 years? Question 2, what can we learn from the response to previous incidents? In particular, the response of Guildford Borough Council to the events of the evening of Friday the 28th of November, which appeared to be in line with the current procedure of this council, where members of the community informed the Guildford Ward Councillor, who then contacted appropriate officers, who then arrived on site the next Saturday morning. Question 3, how much will it cost to resource and run such a service? And here, for example, you will note that just a second ago, I referred to officers in the plural. Due to understandable safety concerns, we would need to deploy at least 2 officers to any incident, meaning that both officers would need to be paid to be on standby each night. Question 4, how realistic are our expectations of the external services? This is a legally complex matter that will require the cooperation of and collaboration with a number of bodies outside of this council. Will their timescales match our desired outcomes? As portfolio holder, I am very open to discussion of this matter, and I know that the executive is supportive of taking action. In fact, my understanding is that Waverley has been trying to get the government to act on this issue for a number of years. However, this motion as it stands offers no numbers or budgetary information, and as a result, I do not believe that the Chamber can have an informed debate on this substance without an officer report being prepared. As a result, I would like to propose that we take a vote to refer this matter to the executive as a result, and in reflection of the recognition of the fact that time is money, I propose to save members' time this evening by proposing a referral amendment, which, as a procedural motion, I understand will go straight to a vote without debate, and I believe I have a second.
Happy to second, Madam Mayor.
Just a procedural vote. Yeah. Don't need to.
No, it's moved, so it should.
Madam Mayor, could I ask for a point of clarification?
Keep in mind that we asked.
Just one moment.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So we have got a motion that's been proposed, and we're just going to display it on the screen. Hopefully you can all read that. And I'm assuming there is a seconder. And thank you, Councillor Murray. And the proposal that it is that it is referred to the executive without debate, I believe.
Yeah. Procedural motion.
Thank you all for your patience. What we're proposing is that Councillor Goodrich puts his question of clarity and then we'll move to the vote. Councillor Goodrich.
Madam Mayor, it seems that my motion is referring the matter to the executive, and the amendment seems to be saying the same thing. Is it an amendment? Because I have made it clear when I spoke that I was referring it to the executive so they could cost it and do all the homework that it needs doing. That is what the portfolio is now saying he wants to do. Is this an amendment, technically, or is it an endorsement of my motion?
Right about. So through you, Madam Mayor, if I could just give council a little bit of advice. I think what's being proposed is actually two separate procedural motions. I think Councillor Fairclough is proposing a motion that this goes to the executive, which is unnecessary because the original motion is that in any event. But also a second motion that we move this without any debate and go straight to the vote on the matter. Thank you. And just in terms of the constitution, when a member proposes a motion to go immediately to the vote, it is up to the mayor to consider whether the item has been sufficiently discussed before the procedural motion is taken.
Councillor Murray, do you have something to say first?
Madam Mayor, if I could, I was happy to second it, but I was hoping that I would be able to speak on the motion, not just that it would go straight to vote. I didn't realise it was just going to go straight to a vote. I wanted to speak as a seconder on the motion.
Councillor Murray, would you like to say what you'd like to say, please?
Thank you very much. So first of all, I was asked to second it, and I was happy to, because it was doing, as Councillor Goodrich has said, the executive was taking it on board and they were going to do it. And Councillor Fairclough assured me that this is what was going to happen, and that's what he said in his motion. So I was absolutely happy to do that. And but I felt that I had to say that. I wanted to say that I agreed wholeheartedly with Councillor Goodrich's motion and the why he brought it up. It's a very, very important for members of the public. And also I was delighted that the portfolio holder is taking it seriously and the leader and the executive want to have it at the meeting. So I just felt a little bit like, why would we just rush it through and not have a discussion about it? I think as a seconder, if I was asked to second it, I should be able to speak in support of it, not just go straight to a vote. So that's why I put my hand up. If that's okay. Well, yeah, I was a little bit, yeah, thank you.
We're just going to have a tiny adjournment. We're back in session.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I think Councillor Fairclough's proposed amendment is actually two proposals wrapped up into one. The first part of the amendment to refer this to the executive is not an amendment because that's what Councillor Goodridge's original motion proposes in any event. The second part of the amendment, which is to move it without debate, move straight to the vote without debate, is a procedural motion which has been proposed and has been seconded, but the Mayor must be satisfied that there has been sufficient debate before she will agree to move direct to the vote without any debate. And my advice to the Mayor is that there hasn't been sufficient debate of the motion at the moment. So we need to allow some debate on Councillor Goodridge's initial motion, which will then go to a vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Obviously, wasn't quite as prepared as I might have been in terms of the content, but fortunately, I've had quite a lot of discussions with both the portfolio holder and the head of planning. First of all, can I thank our planning head, because she went out at the request of the the ward member in Shalford, and went out on a Saturday with an officer to do exactly the sorts of things that is being proposed in this motion. I think if you go back it must be about 5 years, Waverley did have something like this, and we had almost no cases where it was required. We also do keep continually running into those things. I know it was said by some of the speakers that some things don't require stop notices, that don't require court orders and all the rest of it. But a lot of things that we do need to do with enforcement cases are quite complicated. And so some of those things can't be done without court orders and can't be done without involvement of the courts. And other than some of the other backlogs, they're not open usually to do these sorts of things over the weekend. So there is genuinely a limitation as to what can be done on some planning enforcement matters. The actual number of cases we're talking about is incredibly low. The ability for the council to actually prevent some of these things is quite limited. What I'd be very keen not to do is to raise residents' expectations that Waverley can act outside of the law or outside of regulations in order to do some of these things. I have had, and I'm sure Councillor Townsend has had even more of these discussions, so many conversations with at least 3 local government ministers, not to mention the MP Jeremy Hunt, about the fact that our ability to enforce was limited by the powers that the government actually gave us, and that actually, rather than 30 of your MPs signing a letter now, actually acting while you're in government to do some of these things might have been a more prudent message had this be something that you cared about. I know that this is something that you're going to cry, don't make it political, but planning is inherently political because it's always made political by people. Now, I know full well that the numbers of cases here are relatively limited, but this is an area, I mean, there's a reason Councillor Austin's mailbox is full of planning inquiries. Mine, by the way, is full of council tenants' requests, children's services matters, charities that are struggling for funding, things like that, just as an aside. But what Councillor Fairclough has said is that we want to look at a proper costed report, look at how many issues we've actually had, do a proper study about whether this is necessary, do a proper study of what we can actually do about it in terms of the outcomes that are desired, ensure that it's not a sledgehammer to crack a nut, frankly, because two full-time employees on sort of out-of-hours call-in over the weekend is quite significant. But the reason I think that Councillor Fairclough's motion was appropriate is because all of the things that everybody is now about to say is going to be speculative because we haven't got a report. So the reason that we were proposing to move that motion and go straight to a vote is because there will be a point where we can have a proper debate about this. There will be a really good time to do that, which is at the executive. And I'll go a little bit further than Councillor Fairclough, who can't say this on my behalf, so I'll say it in my last 50 seconds. You have seen when we've had these sorts of debates and we've referred them to the executive, that when I chair those sessions of the executive, I open the session up for as maximum engagement as can be done. I've done that on a handful of matters, particularly Sill being the most recent. Without suspending standing orders, I have allowed everybody who wants to have a say, multiple says on the subject. There is only so much value in us hypothetically talking about whether this is that or how many things are this or how much this will cost. Let's have the debate at the executive I will open it up, as I always do on matters like this, when we have a proper report in front of us to actually debate. Otherwise, this is just going to be back and forth posturing, mostly between Liberal Democrats and Conservatives, and it's just a waste of everybody's time. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Munro.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I'm speaking as a ward councillor. I fully support Councillor Goodrich's motion, which I think seems to have general agreement here that it's a matter worth exploring. But planning enforcement is not just about enforcing over the weekend, standing to when you're taken on the hop. Planning enforcement is about sustained action for months and maybe years for very difficult cases. In my ward, as it happens, I don't have any casework which concerns somebody taking advantage of the weekend. That's not taking away the seriousness of that. My casework is concerned with people who allegedly over months and years are trying to get away with serious planning breaches. So I would ask the executive not just to concentrate on the out of hours aspects, but also take some measure of, do we actually have the right structure? Do we have the right people? Can we afford an enhanced enforcement operation and all matters like that? So if we can couch the debate in those terms, to look at it in the round, I'm sure everybody would benefit. So I would ask them to do that. I will, of course, vote for the motion as it stands.
Thank you, Councillor Ruth Reid.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I rarely stand up to speak, but I feel really strongly about this. I don't think there's any need for any out-of-hours service. That's the first point I want to make. Secondly, I've looked today back into the enforcement cases that have been reported on our own website back to 2015, and very few are there. Secondly, or thirdly, I've had a case, and I, like Councillor Follows, I have many that involve people and their problems, but I do have some planning, and one of the latest ones was about a case on the border of my ward with Ewhurst. Now, that was a case which I did have to contact planning enforcement. Planning enforcement was very well organised, is very well organised by this borough, by our wonderful officers. And I can't thank them enough, because I didn't even have to ask for out-of-hours service, because they volunteered to put a stop order on the case over a long weekend, which was bank holiday weekend. So I don't think there's any need for any expensive out-of-hours service. Now, I don't know if everyone's read what I read on our own website, but the use of planning enforcement action is a discretionary power. The power to take enforcement action is entirely discretionary. That's from section 172 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, which is still in existence. So I think a lot of this is just posturing. And why are we doing it now, Councillor Austin, when we've got the unitaries coming up and all the work with that? It's a great distraction. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I had three more speakers, Councillor Gale, Councillor Liz Townsend, Councillor Merriweather, Councillor White. Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will support the motion because living in the rural areas, we know what happens out there, and things get hidden and things happen over weekends quite often. I have had the pleasure of having enforcement come out to things that have happened in the parish council area, but not until work hours. And by then you have some problems on your hand. But when they do come out, they are very efficient. It's a problem we have in rural areas. And if you are in a rural area, and I think you'll know more about it, I mean, once you've cut down all the oak trees, they've gone. And if you could have got somebody out there when they started the work, you would have saved some oak trees. So I will vote for it because I do think it's worth the money. I think whatever it costs, I think we should have that service.
Thank you. Councillor Liz Townsend.
Thank you. And please, I'd like to also join Councillor Ruth Reid in giving my huge thanks to our planning enforcement team because they are amazing and they've got a wealth of experience. And yes, it is a discretionary service. And to say that whatever it costs, we would do it, I don't think is very responsible at all. In fact, I think it's completely reckless. Coming back to what Councillor Goodrich said, saying, about there being a need for this, the numbers are small. I mean, I'm aware of that. I mean, it's not to underplay the seriousness of these matters, but they are small. You know, we would, whilst you're saying we would save money in the long run, there aren't any figures on that. And I'd be happy, like we were saying, you know, I'd be very happy to look into matters like, you know, to see what the cost would be. However, saying that acting early is going to be economical, there's no data to prove that, I'm afraid. We would look into it and be happy to look into it. And also, if you've got models of other councils and what they do, again, happy to look into that. But sometimes, you know, what we do have to consider, and it has been alluded to, is most of the really cases that go on for a long time have a huge number of variables you have to think about. And sometimes it involves children on site, and sometimes on these sites, and also sometimes it involves welfare of the people. And so you can't just come along. There's not an easy answer to come along and just slap a temporary stop notice. There isn't that. We have responsibilities as well as a council to make sure that how we're acting is proportionate and expedient. We cannot just do things very, very quickly. And, you know, and I think to say that there's been a massive escalation is incorrect. I mean, that is an exaggeration. There may have been a couple of particular enforcement which had to be dealt with out of hours. And as has been said, I know I've had issues myself in Cranley, and the officers have come at weekends. They have come on Saturdays, Sundays. So, you know, we already have experienced officers that are extremely flexible. I do think that, you know, it's already been intimated by the portfolio holder for enforcement that we would look into this matter, and I think that's absolutely fine. Provide some figures, but to just, you know, to say that we need 24/7 on a discretionary service. Well, you're saying no, but you haven't put hours. It says mornings, evenings, you know, so it does look like a service over weekends. It does look like it's asking for a very lengthy period of time. So I think it is important for us to say that we will look into it and to see whether there's any particular services that we can perhaps, maybe there's a version of this that we could introduce a hybrid version or something. So we're happy to look into it, but to exaggerate that this is a massive problem, I think, you know, that the figures don't stack up that I'm aware of at this moment in time. But as has been said before, it can be discussed. We can have a proper report, proper figures, and then we'll be far more equipped to be able to discuss this from a very informed point of view.
Thank you. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I hope this contribution gets us over that magic threshold where we've debated this enough. But I'm still not quite sure why we actually have to have a motion to do this. We have a portfolio holder, we all have emails, and Councillor Austin is chair of Overview and Scrutiny, which has, I think, all the authority and powers it needs to actually constitute precisely this kind of a project. A working group, anything like that. So right now, you know, we actually don't know what we're talking about. We don't have any idea of the size of the problem. We don't have any information. We don't have anything on costs. I'm very happy for the executive to go off and do this with value for money, because it's my portfolio, being front and centre of that. But I'm also very, very conscious that we already have an out of hours service, and I'll take what Councillor Munro said really to heart. You know, this is not just a problem that happens in the evenings and at the weekends. That, you know, there are all sorts of shapes and sizes and forms of planning enforcement issues. Anyone who's attended the training that we put on for councillors specifically on this kind of a project understands the breadth and depth that these things can take, and the very real limitations on our powers to actually deal with these things. So there's all these sorts of things that really do, just didn't need to be brought up in a motion that we apparently need to debate for some ethereal amount of time. But I hope at least I've got us 2 minutes closer to getting out of here. Thank you.
Councillor White and then Councillor Long, and then I'm going to say we have had a full and fair debate, and I will go back to Councillor Goodridge. So Councillor White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's not something that we want to go on debating. Councillor Fairclough has made his position, and that's fine by me. However, there's a couple of things that I find a bit conflicting, and I just think it might be worth stating it in case that this helps the executive with their deliberations. Number one is that I suspect that when we have these incidents that we can't talk about, there is police confidentiality gets involved with this. And I think many of the cases is where somebody decides to take possession of land, which they're not permitted to do so under law or under the law of the council. So that's an important issue. I also want to say that I agree totally with Councillor Munro's point that I think this is an ongoing process. I think our enforcement department does do a very good job, but it's an ongoing thing that we need to be aware of. And finally, what I would say, certainly on Farnham Planning and Licensing Group, we are seeing an increasing number of retrospective planning notes coming through. Now, that's a very polite British way of dealing with things where somebody technically has contravened planning. And we're very polite and we say it's retrospective planning, please reapply. I would like as well if the planning department would have a look at this, at these retrospective plannings that come in, because if we just let everything go through on retrospective, there are obvious flagrant issues that a particular individual has totally ignored and thought they'd get away with it. So there's one or two things wrapped up in here. I know it's complicated, but I think it's worthwhile at least putting it out into the open. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Long. Well said.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I would have been entirely comfortable with points 3 and 4 of Councillor Goodridge's motion, but I'm having difficulty with it because of 1 and 2 for reasons that other councillors have identified. It's not costed, and I don't think we can call on the executive to do things without knowing what they will cost, and to call on the executive to develop an out of hours pilot scheme without costing it, and to call on the executive to put in place on-call legal support without costing it causes me concern.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, Councillor Goodridge, your microphone has gone down. Can I suggest you use the microphone next to you? Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if one looks at the motion, we're talking about bringing a detailed implementation report. So we are asking for a report. We're asking for it to be costed. We're asking for all the information. Councillor Fairclough has already said that he's started to do the work, which is great, because he'll need that for the report. But I am concerned that we talk about, well, there's firstly that there is an existing out-of-hours service. Well, if there is, I don't know what the phone number is for ringing on a Saturday morning or 11 o'clock on a Friday night, because I don't think one exists. One rings around and hopes that someone might be available. I'm not saying there are hundreds of cases in the borough per year either. But what I can say is there are a small number which is growing. And that is the worry, that we need to have something in the public domain which makes it clear to members of the public that if they want to chance their arm on a Friday because they think Friday night, because they think they might get away with it, it's business as usual if they should try it. And that is the important thing. To suggest that where you can never get an injunction at the weekend, I have done so with the High Court judge, who's always on duty at any time, and I have obtained injunctions at 3 in the morning on a Saturday, Sunday night. So it can be done. But what I'm saying is that this is something which should be explored. I'm wanting to refer this to the executive so they can produce a report and hopefully include it in the budget. So that's why it's urgent to get it done so that we can have an effective enforcement service. They're very good at enforcing. Yes, I'm not saying our officers are not, but to give them some clout, if you like, and to formally
One moment, Councillor Goodridge.
motion.
I think there's a little bit of background noise here. Councillor Goodridge, over to you.
Thank you. So all I'm asking is that the executive look at formalising this again. If we've got it already, well, that's not a problem. I'm not expecting planning officers or lawyers to be sitting around in the offices or weekends and bank holidays. It's not. We just need an emergency phone number with someone who has an ability to act if it should arise. And that's all I'm asking for. And I would commend this motion to the chamber.
Thank you. So, debate is over.
A point of clarity, if I may, at your discretion, ask the monitoring officer a question.
If it is a point of order.
Do you have your point of order?
Point of order in regards to section 13 of the Constitution, motions on notice.
One moment.
With the Mayor's discretion, I can explain my point of order.
What is your point of order?
My point of order is the motion valid in that it seems to bind the executive to do things without the proper ability to make a decision? It contains no costed reports. The motion specifically asked us to do something without that material. Does it bind the executive to do that without that material?
At the time. Through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Follows, I considered the motion at the time that it was submitted and accepted it because I considered it was lawful and can be enforced. My understanding of the motion is that it is asking the executive to consider something and that it doesn't bind the executive to that.
Call on the executive to.
It calls on the executive to.
One moment, please.
Yeah, okay, the wording is that it resolves to call on the executive to develop an out-of-hours planning enforcement pilot scheme. It doesn't bind the executive to do so. It binds the executive to consider that. The executive would still have the power to not develop that scheme. It would be open to any member before the vote to propose an amendment that the word consider is included in the motion.
Councillor Long?
May I propose that the motion is amended to include the words to consider developing an out of hours planning enforcement in paragraph 1 and consider putting in place an on-call legal support, and that those things will be subject to the detailed report that's called for in paragraph 3.
If I could just point out to council that if you think that's necessary, then that's absolutely fine. But the wording is to call on the executive to do so, not to force them or bind them to. So I still maintain that the original wording of the motion does not impose anything on the executive at all, and you still have decision-making powers. The thing it binds you to do is to consider this by calling on you to do so. You will need to consider whether or not you're going to develop such a protocol. Such a service.
Thank you. We're going to move to the vote
On the amendment.
on the amendment. No,
It's an amendment. So
Yes.
it's been proposed and seconded.
Yes.
The motion to include the word consider.
consider.
Somebody may wish to debate on that or go straight to the vote.
Unless the proposer accepts the amendment, we don't need to do it.
Councillor Goodridge.
I'm happy to consider anything.
Are you happy to accept? That's
If my seconder is, I'm happy to consider. The whole point of the thing is for the executive to have this on their agenda, to urgently to consider it, consider a report that they'll ask their officers to provide, and come up with an answer, bearing in mind the problem. That's all I'm asking for.
Councillor Austin, are you happy?
I think the existing motion is clear, but if it means we leave very soon, I'm very happy to agree with Councillor Goodridge in accepting the amendment. Thank you.
So the amendment is accepted. We now move to the vote on the motion as amended. When lights show, please vote.
We didn't.
Right.
Councillor Goodridge, could you vote on the microphone in front of you? Thank you.
That's voted twice, because he's spoken twice.
Yeah, I've got 2 green lights on now.
First time.
So, a little bit of hush, so you hear the result. Would you like to hear the result? The result is 2 against and 33 for. It is carried. And so, on that note, may I wish you a happy Hanukkah, a happy Christmas, and should you feel generous, and I'm about to make a joke, please put a penny in the old lady's box there.